So my family and I would spend the summer at our college by the lake in Quebec, Canada. My stay-at-home mum lived with us there, while Dad worked in town visiting during the weekends. I had 4 brothers and a sister, and I was the youngest of the family. And back in those days, I was an 11-year-old skinny kid, prone to be teased a lot about my size, which made me really self-conscious. We were also practicing Christians, and things like nudity were considered a sin. I was therefore prude and would not even be seen in my swimming trunks outside my own family. One summer evening at the cottage, I went to bed in my jimmies with about half a ton of bedsheets on. While summer was still in force, the nights were sometimes chilly, and my mum insisted that we sleep with the window open. Built in the early 1900s, the cabin was in fact 2 cottages that my dad had sort of reunited to make one larger place for the family. My parents had their room in the larger squarish part, while us boys shared the older part that was basically a rectangle reminiscing of a mobile home. My older sister had a separate room as well. The beds were modest, I guess, but comfortable. However, that night, I remember waking up sort of half asleep, a few times as well, to change position because the mattress seemed really cold and hard for some reason. At one point, I felt the bed had become ridiculously hard, in fact, and woke me up for good. The place was pitch black, but I noticed that I couldn't see the nightlight that was always on. It was then that it suddenly struck me that I wasn't even in my room anymore. From what I could see and feel, I was laying down on my back, totally naked, outside on a big flat rock like I was some sort of offering to a god. I panicked. I was terrified because I was afraid of the dark. I had no recollection of why I was out there, and it was way too dark to see if anybody else was there watching me. So I froze stiff, completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle, nor utter a word. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out but breath and a low, almost inaudible sound, which got me even more scared. I felt a bug walking on my flat stomach, circling my navel and going down. It was a moth, and I hated bugs because they creeped me out a lot at that time. I imagined that it could get into some orifice, my mouth, my nose, or something, yet I couldn't move to send it away. After a bit, my eyes got used to the darkness, and for the first time I was able to make out where I was, less than 100 feet or so from the cottage. I closed my eyes, concentrated in order to calm down, and when I opened them again, I was finally able to move. And the first thing I did was slap that moth to the next town. I quickly got up, scraping my butt on the rock and hurting my left foot on a jagged edge. I proceeded to walk towards the house. The pain in my foot and my overall numbness prevented me from running. Oddly enough, too, I could feel the cold dirt and the pebbles under my feet, but I had sort of no feeling of the temperature outside at all. It should have been really chilly as I'd been out there naked for a while and there was a light breeze, but I didn't feel it. Maybe the adrenaline was just pumping through my body or something. I don't know, but I reached the door and tried opening it, but it was locked. My mum always locked the door at night when my dad was away, and these turn-of-the-century wood doors had deadlocks engaged from the inside, which means that I had to go around, but the back door was also locked in the same fashion. Fortunately, the guillotine window was open, and it was about 2 feet up the deck. And was this where I came out from? I didn't know, but I knew for sure that I would get back in that way, and without noise I entered the room and carefully slipped back into my bed and buried my head under the pillow. I remember praying that nothing had followed me through that night, and I listened to the silence and eventually slowly faded to sleep. The next morning, as I was coming to, I immediately felt my nakedness under the sheets, and I also felt an itch. I had scratch marks on my butt cheek from the rock, so I thought it wasn't just a bad dream after all. I woke up later than my brothers and sister, and it was a good thing because they hadn't noticed that I was naked in bed, or I would never have heard the end of it. They would have teased me to oblivion if I'm being honest, but I looked around, even under the bed, but I couldn't find my jimmies anywhere. So I got into my jeans and grabbed a t-shirt to join them for breakfast. I didn't know what to make of what I'd just been through. I couldn't tell my siblings because I felt that they would have not believed me anyway. Besides, being raised a Christian, I felt like admitting that I was fully naked outside was somehow a sin that I should be ashamed of. Later that morning, though, my older brother was playing outside, and we all heard his voice as he called my mum to come in and check something, and we ran to see what it was about, and he pointed high up. As I looked, I immediately recognized my pajamas hooked to the highest branches of an old 70 feet tall tree. One part was dangling over our head, the other was stuck in branches facing the lake. Everyone looked back at me, asking what the heck, but I didn't have a clue. My mum asked around, but everybody denied having anything to do with it. And to this day, I'm still at a total loss to explain what the heck happened that night. So, I just want to go ahead and apologize up front that this has a lot of build-up. Lots of things led up to what I saw last night, but I feel the need to explain it. So first, I need to give a little bit of context. I'm a painting major at a very old college. It was even a Confederate hospital in the Civil War. Every building has its own ghost story and lore. Other students seem to have fun, spooky bonfire ghost stories, but no, not the art building. We just have some genuinely scary stuff, I guess. We've dealt with things flying off the shelf, voices, whistling, knocking, footsteps, phantom elevator riders. But last night was my most intense experience by far. The building is open 24/7 and my painting final was due today, so obviously I was up there late last night. The painting final was the last on the roster for the building, so most people had cleared out, drove home, semester over. So I was up there alone for quite a while. I was painting silently when I heard two very distinct loud knocks. There's two problems with this. One, nobody came in, and two, I heard it directly in front of me, not behind me, meaning that it came from the window and not the door. But I'm on the 3rd floor. I just kind of froze and waited to see if I could hear any kind of footsteps or sign of human life or something. But it was silent. I went back to the painting, and then about 5 or 10 minutes later, the door opened behind me, and my friend came in behind me, and we both jumped pretty hard, which isn't like him. He apologized for his squirreliness and worked on his painting silently. He's not a squirrely or quiet guy. He is normally a loud, flamboyant, raunchy character, 24/7 too, who famously does not really get scared by much. I mean, every time the air conditioner would rattle or the wall would creak, we would both snap our heads up and confirm, was that the AC? And yeah. Something about the energy was just so anxiety-inducing that night. I fixed myself a cup of tea to calm my nerves, but the anxiety just formed a migraine. Another 5 minutes later, my boyfriend came in. He also looked a little worse for wear. He turned to my friend Jamie and said, "Who were you talking to in the illustration room?" Jamie tried to correct him. "I wasn't talking to anyone. I thought that I heard someone in there, but I was wrong." We all perked up a little bit as Justin said, "But I saw you in there, talking to a man. You two were by the window." Jamie said, "I heard someone talking in there, but when I looked in there, it was empty. I was standing by the window to see if the sound was from the sidewalk, was traveling in or something, but there was no one outside or in the room." We sort of sat in silence for a minute. I'm the only one in the group who believes in the supernatural. They don't. They vehemently hate ghost believers. I don't think anyone wanted to admit what they were thinking, but after a moment, Justin said, "And someone was knocking on the printmaking door earlier too." I hadn't told him about the knocking. I didn't even want to talk about it at that point, to be honest, but me and Justin were supposed to hang out that night. He left early due to a migraine. We both had migraines from the stress, I think. I stayed up there, though, with Jamie for another half an hour, still anxiety-ridden the whole time, absolutely shaking in my boots. I just couldn't get myself to calm down. I decided to go for a walk just to get myself out of the room for a bit, but that was a really bad idea. So as I was walking down the hall, I suddenly felt an intense, crushing, instinctual fear. The I'm in the woods and a cougar is after me fear. I couldn't see or hear anything. In fact, it was just so silent I could hear a pin drop, but I felt like I was being hunted. It's hard to explain, but I went from a little stress to I'm about to die in like half a second. It was horrific, and I stood there for so long just sweating it out. I felt a little smidge of bravery eventually and stomped my feet. I don't know why, I just wanted to give it a hey, to heck with you sort of thing to bring my courage up. I'm a strange person, I know that, but that will become absolutely obvious when you hear this next bit. So I started speed walking to the drawing room, and in the drawing room we have a real human child skeleton named Derek, and sometimes I go in there to talk to Derek. I know, it's weird. I'm not a perfect person, I know that, but let me talk to my toddler skeleton in peace, okay? Anyway, I got in there and turned on one of the spotlights, which is just enough light for me to get around, and headed back to Derek. I vented my grievances to him, and after a pause I said, I'm sorry, and was cut off by a loud bang behind me. I did not stay to see what it was, did not turn around, and honestly, it sounded like one of those spotlights jamming into the concrete floors. I ran out of there as soon as I got my body past the threshold of the door, and I poked my upper body back in to slam the light switch back off. That was when I saw it. Illuminated by just the edge of the spotlight was a figure, just a little too tall, about 7 to 8 feet. He was in the corner that would have been behind me while I was sitting down, and as the light turned off, I could still see his faint outline. It was like what many people describe as a shadow man, but man, he was looking at me and I was terrified. I sprinted back to the painting room, grabbed my keys, and got the heck out of there. I left my jacket, my backpack, my MacBook. I mean, who cares, right? I just wanted out at that point. And it's been so long since I felt fear like that. I haven't told anyone what happened. I really don't want to. I felt sick sharing this, in fact. I want to get this exam over and done with, and then just not ever think about that building until, well, January, when I have to go back. This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to go scuba diving during Christmas holidays. So my family and I, 25-year-old female, booked a few dives. They're really good scuba divers, way better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that also allowed them to participate in way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well, and I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor yet. Even more if it's a dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving though, here's a quick explanation. So, you can dive safely until a certain deep before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while going back to the surface a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you ride up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in worst case scenario, to dying. So we decided that what I could manage was a little private lesson with an instructor first, prior to more exciting dives with my family. For the first day, my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to while I was alone with my instructor, and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay, and we were on a beautiful coral reef. There were many beginners on the boat, and I was by far the most experienced here. So, finally my instructor decided that he could manage me with another student, which was a true beginner, and after a small briefing with every safety rule and hand sign, which is the only way to communicate underwater, we began our descent. Everything came back to me pretty quickly, and I was enjoying myself, going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver. It was probably about 20 minutes, I would guess, that we were down here. Everything was perfect too, beside one thing. You see, it was a windy day and there was a really heavy swell that day. It's less of a problem underwater than it is for the surface swimmer, but the only thing is that it requires more physical effort to swim, and so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which is pretty normal. So I signed to my instructor that I was running thin on air, and he nodded. But at this level, it was far from being critical or anything. It was at this moment, though, that I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor any of the students. In fact, I'd never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot, so I assumed that he was with us, and I just didn't pay attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards us and then signed me that he was out of air. When an air failure happens in scuba diving, there's a very strict procedure. You have to help the person, no questions asked, because every second is vital. If you faint underwater, then you drown. On your gear, you have 2 breathing devices too. I'm not sure about the English words, but there's a main device and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing on my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited until the guy seemed calmed down and tried to hand sign to him to go see my instructor. But strangely, he nodded no and signed to me to start our ascent. I understand this procedure. I was a little low on air and above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was to go up to the surface before having an air failure, but I would have to tell my instructor first. The guy was very reluctant though, and it was strange because it would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started an ascent with us. During this time, I was sort of panicking as seeing my own air levels going down so quickly, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. Well, I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. But once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and sort of nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving towards the beach, without the strange guy, mind you, that I asked my instructor what happened. I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down or something? I replied with, okay, but why did he tell me that he was out of air? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signing, that he was probably not telling me that he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. But I'm certain that I saw him do the air failure sign, but okay, whatever. In any case, the next day I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time, Charlie. I've had time to think about that guy, and I was worried about him, so I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew this guy, and if he was okay because I didn't see him going back to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did, and she told me, oh, that's Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time that he has a day off from the restaurant he's working here, he asks us to drive him on the coral reef for the morning and pick him up in the afternoons. I actually ate at his restaurant this noon and saw him, so don't worry. I was pretty relieved by that, to be honest, and told myself that it was just a big misunderstanding, probably just a sign comprehension issue or something. Anyway, the rest of the week went on without any incidents. I was doing more and more technical dives and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor and I never saw Marvin again. That is, until the last dive. So, it was New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck and I felt trained enough to try it without any instructor, just my family and me. It was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me, like 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day, male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too, so we would cross him and he would help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, in fact, and my family felt comforted too when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. And it was at that moment that, completely out of the blue, I saw Marvin swimming towards me again. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, still staying under my decompression stop level. I was a little surprised to be honest, and even more surprised when he signed me again that he was out of air. I was mistrustful at this point, but if there were any chance that it would be true, I could not help it. So I handed him my spare breather. This time I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't a problem. He took it, started breathing in it, and then took my arm. I reached to see his air level instrument, but he prevented me from seeing it. And then he signed for me to start an ascent with him. I immediately said no. I wasn't at my deepest when he reached me. I had been deeper at this time. But I had decompression stops to do, so I saw that my father saw us, but he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer, a device which calculates when and how long to decompress, to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled, and then just started swimming up, still holding me. I was sort of paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress right now. I then understood, though, that I was now in pretty serious danger, that if I let him do what he wanted, I could die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wriggling frantically as I saw my father and sister way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly towards us, and I managed to hit this guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper, and the guy quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a very long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. Then we started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously, and on the surface, I just started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my instructor and that this is why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told my instructor everything that happened, who took it more seriously this time, and he told me to show him Marvin when we go up to the surface. The thing is, he never came. The next day, though, on New Year's, we went a last time to the scuba diving club because my little sister had a diploma to collect, and we saw Charlie. Still choked up, I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffed. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and that he hadn't gone scuba diving, which means that whoever this guy was, it wasn't Marvin. To this day, I still don't know who this guy was and what he wanted, and why he tried to kill me, maybe twice. What makes a murderer's mind tick? Killer Psyche is a true crime podcast from Wondery that explores these types of questions about the crimes that killers and criminals commit. Killer Psyche covers the high-profile cases that have shocked the world, and host Candice DeLong uses her 5 decades of experience as a clinical psychiatric nurse and FBI criminal profiler to dissect the motivations and behaviors of the most terrifying felons in history. And you'll definitely want to listen to a recent episode of Killer Psyche where Candice looks into the mysterious murder of Ted Amon, a wealthy Wall Street financer. Ted had been going through a divorce with his wife of 13 years, Generosa, and millions in assets and child custody were at stake. Generosa and her boyfriend Danny Pelosi were the prime suspects, but Generosa died of cancer before police could prove her involvement. In 2004, Danny was convicted of second-degree murder, but still maintains his innocence. How does hatred drive a person to murder the father of their children? One of the highlights of the show for me personally was just how knowledgeable Candice is regarding all of the peripheral details to a case. It was really fascinating to gain insights into the aspects that, generally speaking, are either overlooked or not considered in much detail when viewing what is available to the general public. Candace clearly has a lot of expertise in her field, and the reflections she provides are really intriguing. Listen to Killer Psyche on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. So this first story happened to me when I was 16 and lived in my parents' house. It was late one night in summer, and I was in one of my 2 bedrooms. My brother and sister, both older than me, already lived in their own, and I got one of their bedrooms for myself, which sort of made me get 2. In one bedroom, I spent the night sleeping in my bed next to my desk and closet. The other one, I would spend the day over there, sort of packed with my TV, my PlayStation, a sofa, and another closet. I was watching South Park on TV around 2:30 in the morning while laying on my sofa. I always stayed up that late during the summer holidays, and why I remember this so well is because of the episode of South Park that was running on MTV this night, The Losing Edge. It's my favourite episode, and on that day it was quite hot in Germany, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky the whole day. So, as I said, it was night time, still really hot. Hot here is like 26 degrees Celsius. But while I was watching TV, all of a sudden, the temperature just dropped, and I felt like cold air in my room. The next thing that I remember were faint noises from outside my room. At first, I thought that my parents were maybe out there, who were sleeping, since I hadn't seen them open a door for like a couple of hours. But that wasn't it. The noise got louder, and I muted my TV just to listen to the noises and to try and locate where they were coming from. And they definitely came from outside of my room. So I got up, walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was pitch black and I couldn't see anything, except for the steps to my right, which were lit up by my still running muted TV screen. Also, I couldn't really make out that both of my parents were asleep. That's because my parents, even to this day, sleep in separate rooms because of heavy snoring. Both of them, that is. So, it definitely wasn't my parents, but what was that noise? I step into the hallway, and to the right down the hallway. On the left side was the front door, and both my rooms were the first rooms to the left and right from the front door, which meant that I needed to go deeper into the house to locate the noises. As I walked through the dark hallway, I could sort of make out that the noises sounded like cupboard doors opening and closing, but not rapidly, more like slowly and gently, with the familiar clonk of wood hitting on the wood at the end. The only room in our house with cupboards was the kitchen, which is in the same room as the living room and the dining room. So, step by step, I sort of walked to the door, my head to the side, pushing my ear forward, trying to hear the sound better. The next thing that I heard was sort of like a rattling sound, as if 2 plates were constantly put onto each other, and I thought that maybe one of my parents must be inside the kitchen. So I took the door handle into my hand and began to turn it. And all of a sudden, there was just nothing. The sound stopped all of a sudden. I decided not to step into the kitchen, and I turned around to walk back into my room, through the still dark hallway. And that's when the sound started up again. Halfway back, I turned around in the middle of the hallway and walked back to the door again, but when I got there, nothing. The sound stopped again. My heart started to race at that moment. I wasn't sure if I should open the door or not, so I waited for a full 30 seconds just to see if the sound restarted, and yeah, it did. They started again, and this time even louder and much more frantic than before. I was half scared out of my mind at this point, but I collected my courage and I opened the door. As I stepped into the kitchen and lit up the room, the sound stopped. And the strangest thing was that the kitchen was completely untouched. Everything was in its place. But I freaked when I felt the cold air pass by me while I was still standing in the kitchen, panicky, turning around, and man, that is the most terrifying moment that I've ever been through. Moments later, I could feel the hot air from the summer night again. I shut the light, closed the door, and I ran back into my room. There was heavy breathing, sweating, and my heart was racing like crazy. Needless to say, I wondered the whole night what the heck this incident was, and didn't sleep not even a minute. The next morning, I asked my parents if they noticed anything, or if they were in the kitchen after midnight at all, but they almost simultaneously said no. So then, the obvious question is, what was it? So, the first paranormal experience that I had was back when my age was in the single digits, maybe around 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio to be more specific. The town, or village as we grew up calling it, was not large by any means, maybe around 40 to 50 people at most. During this time though, my family didn't have the internet or cable TV, cell phones were just starting to become mainstream, mid-90s era, and as such, entertainment was mostly chores or roaming the surrounding area, just exploring. My house was backed by fairly dense woods. There was a steep decline with a relatively flat wooded area where a creek ran through it. This creek wasn't very deep, waist deep in certain areas, but mostly knee or ankle deep. But it was pretty wide. Growing up, I practically lived in those woods, hiking up and down that creek, mapping the woods, exploring a few long abandoned and collapsed houses that nature reclaimed. I lived and breathed nature practically, and those woods were my home, away from home. My father grew up in that area. My aunt and uncle and cousins lived just next door, and it was a pretty close-knit community. Naturally, everyone has ghost stories about their own hometown, a haunted house, a tragedy of some sort that remains a stain on its history. And my village, well, it was no different. My father would always tell stories about ghosts or abnormal happenings that he experienced in his youth here. One thing that he would always tell me when I told him that I was going into the woods was the trees may not walk about or talk, but they do see and remember. I always thought of that as him just saying, don't be stupid out there. Now, my first encounter with the people of the woods, which is what I always called them, was when I was on one of my daily excursions into the wild green. It was mid-July and it was hot and humid. I stuck mostly to the creek as it was pretty cool there, and I didn't have to battle my way through the thick undergrowth as well, which was a plus. But I hiked approximately about 2 miles along the creek hunting for crawdads, crawfish, and looking for signs of deer, rabbit, or the fabled albino squirrel that we had here. I kept traveling and eventually arrived at a relatively open field that had waist-high grass, and I frequently stopped here to gather wild blackberries, rest, and spook the few white-tailed deer bedded in the area. But that day was different. You see, as I drew closer to the field, I noticed someone standing in the field. Instinctively, I slowed down, lowered my posture, and tried to minimize my noise. I really wasn't used to seeing someone out this far into the woods. The nearest house to that location was maybe about 1.5 miles through thick undergrowth and fairly steep ravines to climb. As I hugged the bank of the creek, I moved to the edge of the open field, slowly peeking up over the tall grass to see if they were still there. But nothing. I thought that perhaps they had seen or heard me trudging through the creek and instinctively ducked down too. I wasn't about to find out though, so I turned around and headed back home, all 2.5 miles back. I was more aware of my surroundings and far more cautious of my sound as I moved that time, avoiding walking in the creek to prevent the sloshing of water to give me away. As I crept through the branches jutting out into the bank of the creek, I made my way to another area that I was familiar with. A small game trail ran through here, and it would cut my time and distance back home a good bit. The only downside was that it was pretty overgrown to either side, and portions had thick thorn bushes. The entire time that I trekked back, though, I don't know, I just felt like I was being watched. I never really felt in danger or vulnerable of being attacked or anything, but I could almost swear that I felt eyes on me. I was uneasy the entire time that I followed the game trail, routinely stopping and listening to determine if I could hear footsteps, or if I was being followed at all. But still, nothing. I made it about, I would say, halfway back home, when all of a sudden I saw in the corner of my eyes a figure standing a short distance away. But as I moved my eyes in the direction of the figure, they seemed to just sort of meld into the foliage. I thought that maybe my paranoia was making me see things, so I just hurried on. A few hundred more feet in, I see again another figure, this time further away out of my peripheral, and again as I looked in that direction, they sort of meld back into the background. But this time it happened twice. As I looked and that figure disappeared, another appeared again in my peripherals, closer but still a ways away. Again, the entire time I never really felt in danger or anything. Creeped out, yes, but I never felt like whatever there was nefarious and intent. This continued on for the remainder of my time, making my way back home, but the more it happened, the less I felt, I don't know, afraid of the figures. Even going as far as saying out loud, "I know you're there. I don't know what you want, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Eventually, I made it back to my backyard, and I turned around to face the woods to see if they were there, but there was nothing. Now, my father was next to the shed, burning some cut grass in the backyard. I walked over to him to tell him what I had experienced, and before I could say a word, he looked at me and, with a slight grin, said, "I saw you saw them too." I guessed that I had the look of terror written on my face. Without even missing a beat, he put down the hoe that he was using to stoke the fire, walked past me to the woodline, and pulled out the can of dip that he had in his pocket. He opened it, took a pinch out, and placed it on a stone that was jutting out from the ground and walked back. I asked what he was doing, and he said that he gave them an offering. He began explaining what he meant by the trees see and remember, that it was important that we respect nature whenever we enter her domain, and give an offering in return when we take things from her. Otherwise, she just may not let us back out. He gave me the can of dip and said that what I saw were what he believed were spirits of Native Americans keeping watch over their former land. I really didn't know what they were at the time, but I just followed suit with what my dad did whenever I made my way back into the woods. I always left an offering, and although I did see them from time to time, I never felt like I was in any danger, and I always made sure to respect them. If they appeared in my peripherals, I would travel in the opposite direction, apologizing for any transgressions. My cousins and many people in my village, they were all aware of their existence too, and just kind of gave them a wide berth whenever they appeared. I was completely oblivious to their existence, but when I learned of them and experienced them, a whole lot of people opened up about them, about some of the history of the town and stuff like that. It was an interesting experience, and it's something that I'll never forget. It definitely was creepy, but again, thankfully, I never felt like I was in any danger. In 2009, I was a delivery driver for a place that I won't name. I'd been a delivery driver for a while at this point, and I loved the job. I'm super extroverted anyway and love chatting with people, and it was just fun. I also had my fair share of mildly creepy encounters, given that I'm a girl and I was delivering in one of the sketchier areas of my city. I never thought really much of any of them, or saw any real threat. But one night in particular has always stuck with me. I worked the night shift, so from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. At around 8 p.m. this night, some guy ordered his food, and the delivery was easy enough. His house was kind of creepy. Like, there were no lights, and when he answered the door, there was a foul smell that immediately hit me. He also didn't say anything, and I said my usual, there's that for you, and could I get you to fill this out? The tip thing. But he didn't reply at all, or even acknowledge me asking him to sign the slip. I didn't think too much of it, and I just headed back to the store. And almost exactly when I arrived back, another order popped up to the same house, and he had ordered the exact same thing. I was confused, but still not too worried, and took the delivery and had the same experience. No lights on, smelled terrible, and he didn't say a word. I headed back to the store feeling pretty uncomfortable, but again didn't think too much of it. But I started to get extremely uncomfortable when I arrived back to the store and another identical order was up. My manager at the time, unfortunately, didn't understand the creepiness of the whole thing and insisted that I take it. Despite my reluctance, I took it. But this time when he opened the door, I told him, you can order more than one sandwich at a time, you know, as a sort of attempt at humor. He didn't say anything and just closed the door. I was thoroughly creeped out, and I did a sort of sprint back to the car, and when I looked back at the house, I noticed that a light was on, and I saw someone standing at the window. I couldn't make out any features, but I just assumed that it was him. In the end, I still don't know who was standing in the window or why. My manager called me from the store before I was even able to start my car to inform me that another identical delivery had popped up, and he directed me to leave as quickly as I could because he was starting to see the danger of the situation. As the call ended, I saw the man running up to my car. I couldn't move for a second because, honestly, I was just in shock. But he was yelling something that I couldn't understand. I just sped away as fast as I possibly could, given that I was shaking like a leaf. But we blacklisted this guy that night after he made several attempts to call the store. I still have no idea what his endgame was or who that other person was up the stairs. Was this an attempt to have me come back so that they could do something to me? Was that person upstairs the one ordering this stuff? And did they need help? I'm still puzzled by the whole situation, but man, is it creepy.